This is Learning with Coach History. This is the sixth and final lesson in the Cold War, the end of the Cold War. Vocab: Richard Nixon, Henry Kissinger, realpolitik, détente, SALT I Treaty, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, Mikhail Gorbachev, Strategic Defense Initiative, Glasnost, Perestroika, and INF Treaty. Richard Nixon became president in 1969. Nixon's main foreign policy advisor was Henry Kissinger, who later became his Secretary of State. Kissinger based his foreign policy views on a philosophy known as realpolitik. This meant that foreign policy should be based on consideration of power, not on ideals or moral principles. Kissinger believed it was practical to ignore a country that was weak, but it was important to deal with strong nations. Realpolitik was a change from the policy of containment. Nixon and Kissinger changed U.S. relations with communist countries by trying to ease poor relations. They called their policy détente. This policy was aimed at ending Cold War tensions. In 1972, Nixon visited Communist China. Before this, the U.S. had refused to recognize the communist government. 3 months later, Nixon went to the Soviet Union. Nixon and the Soviet leader signed the SALT I Treaty. This 5-year agreement limited nuclear weapons. Nixon's success in foreign affairs helped him win re-election. Nixon had the CIA begin covert operations in Chile to stop the threat of communism in that country. He also sent military aid to Israel. Kissinger attempted to forge a peace agreement in the Middle East. Eventually, Israel signed a ceasefire with Egypt and then with Syria. Gerald Ford replaced Nixon as president. Like Nixon, he continued a foreign policy focused on stopping the spread of communism. He also kept Henry Kissinger on as Secretary of State. Ford continued talks with China and the Soviet Union. In 1974, he participated in a meeting in Helsinki, Finland. There, 35 countries, including the Soviet Union, signed the Helsinki Accords. These were agreements that promised greater cooperation between the nations of Europe. Trouble continued in Southeast Asia. Fighting continued in South Vietnam, and Ford asked Congress for funds to help the South Vietnamese against the communist North Vietnamese. Congress refused, and South Vietnam surrendered to the North in 1975. Then, when communist Cambodia seized U.S. merchant ships, Ford ordered airstrikes against Cambodia. Problems occurred in other continents for Ford. Africa. American forces took part in a civil war in Angola. The country was governed by 3 political organizations, and each wanted power. Angola's struggle became an international affair, with the United States supporting 2 of the 3 warring factions, and the Soviet Union and China backing the third. Congress refused to get involved in another foreign war. A Marxist government took control of Angola. Ford ran for re-election in 1976 against Democrat Jimmy Carter. Carter ran as an outsider, or someone apart from the Washington politics. Carter had a deep interest in human rights, and that influenced his foreign policy. It was this instance on human rights that led to a breakdown in relations with the Soviet Union. He didn't like the way the Soviet Union treated opponents of its government, so he delayed negotiations for a second SALT agreement. Eventually, in 1979, Carter and Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev, Leonid Brezhnev, signed SALT II. It was meant to limit the number of strategic weapons and nuclear missile launchers that each side could produce. But the treaty met with opposition in the Senate. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in December of 1979, Carter withdrew his support for the agreement, and it was never ratified. Ronald Reagan became president in 1980. He was fiercely opposed to communism. As president, he helped end the Cold War. He formed a relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev, the general secretary of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. Reagan increased U.S. defense spending, hoping to bankrupt the Soviets. He had plans to add nuclear warheads to the U.S. arsenal. He asked scientists to develop a special defense system. He did this as a part of Strategic Defense Initiative, a system designed to keep Americans safe from enemy missiles. Reagan's position made the relations with the Soviets worse. They ended arms control talks. With the Soviet Union, Gorbachev supported glasnost, openness in discussing social problems, and perestroika, economic restructuring in the Soviet Union. He let private citizens own land and also allowed more free speech and held free elections. He knew that better relations with the United States would allow the Soviets to reduce their military spending and help the economy. Reagan saw that Gorbachev's leadership was different from other leaders. He was willing to negotiate. Talks led to the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Reagan and Gorbachev signed the treaty in December of 1987. The Senate ratified it in May of 1988. Gorbachev encouraged the people of East Germany and Eastern Europe to go their own ways. He encouraged satellite nations to move towards democracy. Gorbachev's reforms and a weak economy led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. All the republics that were in the Soviet Union became independent nations. They formed a loose confederation called the Commonwealth of Independent States. The collapse of the Soviet Union ended the Cold War. In January of 1993, Russia and the United States signed the START II treaty. This treaty cut both nations' nuclear weapons by 2/3.